This is the KOB4 Santa Fe, New Mexican U.S. Senate debate. The candidates working hard to earn your vote are Democrat Ray Lujan, Republican Mark Ronchetti, and Libertarian Bob Walsh. Moderating tonight, KOB's Tessa Mentis and Chris Ramirez, and Editor-in-Chief of the Santa Fe New Mexican, Phil Casaus.
And good evening. For those of you watching here on KOB4 TV, KOB.com, the Santa Fe New Mexican.com, KRWG in Las Cruces, or if you are listening from our network of radio partners all across New Mexico, welcome.
And we welcome Phil Casaus, Editor-in-Chief at the Santa Fe New Mexican, to tonight's moderating team. And we are delighted to have the candidates who will appear on your ballot running for the open U.S. Senate seat. They will be joining us tonight.
And tonight the candidates are appearing from 3 locations. Mark Ronchetti is with us inside our studio. Ray Lujan is in his campaign office in Albuquerque, and Bob Walsh is at his home in Santa Fe. Because of COVID-19 risks, we gave candidates the option to appear from wherever they feel safest.
There is a crew from KOB with each remote candidate to provide timekeeping, enforce our rules, and to provide the live technology to broadcast out of their locations. And a timekeeper has been provided to Mr. Ronchetti here in our studio.
Candidates will have 1 minute for opening remarks. They will then have 90 seconds to answer questions. Rebuttals are at the moderator's discretion, and those are no more than 45 seconds. Candidates will also have 90 seconds for their closing remarks.
And moderators may interrupt candidates who exceed the agreed time limits. We will take one break about halfway through the debate, and candidates agree to come into this debate without any prepared notes or scripts. Now, late last week, representatives from the campaigns drew names for order of appearance for introductions and closing remarks. Bob Walsh will go first, and Mr. Walsh, you may now begin your introduction.
On behalf of myself and the other candidates, and on behalf of the viewers, we very much appreciate KOB giving us this opportunity to have a frank exchange of views, so that the voters have better options, better understanding of what they are voting for. We have 3 of us have appeared in another forum last week, and I'm sure you can look forward to a civilized and informative discussion. In the Senate, we have 6 years in office. We have ample time to discuss each matter carefully, and you can expect that we will be thinking about everything carefully tonight and giving you our views.
Okay, Mr. Walsh, thank you. Mr. Ronchetti, you drew second, so you may now begin your introduction.
Tessa, thanks very much. Thanks to KOB. This is the only studio I haven't gone live from, so it's good to get that off the old bucket list. And you know, when we thought about getting involved in this race, my wife and I thought about our daughters, Ava and Ella. We want them to grow up in the country that we grew up in, a country where they can chase their dreams, and that really only depends on how hard they're willing to work for them. That's their only limitation. But in New Mexico now, that's getting harder and harder. We don't educate our kids well enough. We don't have safe enough streets, and we don't have the job opportunities that so many of our families deserve. What's happening in Washington isn't working for New Mexico. And if we keep sending the same people back, they're going to get the same results. I'll give my opponent credit. In Congress, he has risen the ladder. But the question is this: did my opponent end up as Nancy Pelosi's assistant speaker because he was looking out for your best interest? That question answers itself, and you deserve better, and I hope to get your vote.
Mr. Ronchetti, thank you. Ray Lujan, you may now begin your introduction.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in tonight. I'm Ray Lujan. I'm proud to be born and raised in New Mexico. My dad, Ben, was a union iron worker. My mom, Carmen, retired from the local public school district. I'm 4th generation on the small farm out in Ambe, where I learned from my parents and grandparents to value hard work and understand that no job is too big or too small. Look, COVID-19 has hit every one of your lives very hard. And that's why I've worked to deliver resources to help you rebuild and to recover. I've also worked to expand and increase coverage to get quality health care. I've also been proud to make sure that I was leading to protect people with pre-existing conditions, because a cancer diagnosis should not lead to bankruptcy or losing your home. I'm also very proud that I've helped lead initiatives to invest in New Mexico's economy, investment in our national labs and our bases, and also deliver infrastructure like the Navajo Nation Gallup Water Pipeline. My name is Ben Ray Lujan, and I look forward to the conversation tonight, and I hope to earn your vote.
Mr. Lujan, thank you. Let's jump into our questions. There is a bitter fight right now in the U.S. Senate about whether or not to confirm Supreme Court Justice nominee Amy Coney Barrett. Her confirmation possibility excites anti-abortion activists who believe she may be the pivotal vote to reverse Roe v. Wade. Here's the question. Do you believe Roe v. Wade needs to be upheld or overturned? And we're going to start this question with Mr. Mark Ronchetti.
You know, Chris, I think part of the issue here is litmus tests. And when you go with a blind question and you say Roe versus Wade right now, it's a very difficult question to answer simply because you don't know what the case will be. But I will say this right now, and as Judge Gorsuch has said, it is currently settled law. Now, not knowing what comes next, that'll have to be determined by the justices at the time. But I think one thing here ends up being a key, and that is now the Supreme Court has turned into such a bitter political battle. All this is the two sides getting together and fighting it out with each other, litmus test after litmus test, and it's gotten very, very ugly. If we go back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and you remember, she got 96 votes to get onto the Supreme Court, not because 96 senators agreed with her judicial philosophy. What they agreed with, though, is they agreed that she was qualified. But that's no longer where we are. We start off with litmus tests, and then we get to the personal attacks. That's what we're seeing on Amy Coney Barrett right now. Her faith is being attacked. Everything is being pulled out to go after someone personally. And that's part of my problem and one of the reasons I'm running. And that is we have to take this partisanship out of this process. We cannot turn the courts into something that is a political battle constantly, constantly, constantly. And one other thing that really concerns me is the fact that when you end up with these fights on either side, the only people that get left behind are the people here in New Mexico.
Okay, we're going to go now to Ben Ray Lujan to answer the same question.
Chris, thank you for this important question. I support Roe v. Wade. It's the law of the land, and it should not be overturned. And that's going to be an important part of the conversation during these upcoming confirmation hearings. But look, make no mistake, President Trump and Mitch McConnell are trying to ram through the Supreme Court nomination so that they can repeal the Affordable Care Act. President Trump, Senate Republicans, and House Republicans filed a lawsuit to try to overturn the Affordable Care Act. And here's the truth. Here are the facts, and here's the reality. The day after the U.S. Supreme Court would repeal the Affordable Care Act, all of your protections for those of you that have cancer or diabetes, those are called pre-existing conditions. All those protections would go away. All those protections that were built into the Affordable Care Act would be repealed. And that's just a travesty. The other thing that was important today is I think all of you saw the polling across America where people across New Mexico and across the United States, they want Mitch McConnell and Senate Republicans to have the same urgency in coming together with a COVID deal to provide relief to the American people before they move forward with their confirmation of the Supreme Court justice. So I'm certainly hopeful that Mitch McConnell will be listening to the American people and that we can do what's right to find a deal and be able to get it across the finish line.
All right, let's go ahead and go to Mr. Bob Walsh now for the same question.
The basis for the decision on Roe v. Wade was the right of privacy. There was an absolute right of privacy with a patient and their healthcare workers. And no healthcare treatment can be made illegal unless that right to privacy is violated. So I have every confidence that any qualified Supreme Court nominee will uphold Roe v. Wade. As for the Affordable Care Act, that is bad law. The federal government was never given authority over health care. When I was young, I was taught in my civics class that health care was an example of the 10th Amendment, that a power not given to Congress was reserved for the states. So libertarians believe that we should have a free market in healthcare, that everyone should be able to choose the level of insurance they want, the doctors they want, and the treatments they want. And the very existence of a Health and Human Services Department is ridiculous because it does not provide health. What it does is takes our money, keeps some of it, and returns the rest to hospitals and states with rules.
Okay, there was no opportunity there for rebuttal, so with that, we'll go to my co-moderator, Tessa Mentes.
All right, Chris, thank you very much. Millions of Americans continue to need help during this COVID-19 pandemic. So if you are crafting a relief package, what are your top 2 priorities to be added into the legislation? And also, what would you refuse to include? And we are going to start with this question with Representative Lujan.
Well, Tessa, it's not just 2 priorities that are important for relief for the American people. COVID-19 has hit every family across New Mexico and across America. Over 210,000 people have died, many here at home. And that's why it's been important every step of the way to put people first, to make sure that there was support with direct payments for the American people, which I supported, and there should be another round of direct payments for people across New Mexico of $1,200. It's going to be important that there's more support for people that have lost their job through no fault of their own with unemployment insurance. There needs to be the inclusion of investments for small businesses through more loans through PPP, but also grants. And how about all these other businesses that didn't qualify for some of these loans and grants before? They need to be included. And that's why I advocated for community banks and for the Farm Credit Bureau to be included so that they could help those that they're closest to, which are the smallest businesses in our communities. Schools need to open safely, and there needs to be an infusion of support to every school district across the country to help them as well. Our hospitals need help. There's more support that's needed for testing. There's more support that's needed for the delivery of PPE because President Trump failed to provide a national plan in that response. And then lastly, look, there needs to be support for people across the country, and that's why there should be inclusion of investments like infrastructure, other ideas to see what we can do to provide support to every one of our communities, and investments to states like New Mexico and local governments like in Albuquerque and every corner of our beautiful state.
Representative Lujan, thank you. Mr. Walsh, your turn.
The response of the federal government has been atrocious. It needs to get out of the way. The Food and Drug Administration is not approving treatments that are needed. This is just a continuation of the Food and Drug Administration obstructing health care for people with rare diseases. They're not able to get treatments until there has been extensive and expensive testing and approval by the FDA. Similarly, the CDC obstructed labs from developing tests for COVID-19, and then came out with a test of its own that didn't work. As for the money, where is this money coming from? Well, it's our money. They will look at your withholding on your pay stub. That is your money being taken to Washington, where they're keeping some of it and then returning some to buy your votes.
Mr. Walsh, thank you. And finally, Mr. Ronchetti.
Look, Tess, I think a couple things here. First of all, we have to be able to provide help to those targeted businesses that did not receive help during the original CARES Act here. And there are a tremendous amount of them here across New Mexico. So we can definitely do that right out of the chute here. Also, we need liability protection for businesses that are doing it safely and they're doing it right. They shouldn't have to fear frivolous lawsuits in all of this. And we also have to start bringing manufacturing back to this state and to this country. Look, COVID laid bare the fact that the Chinese have a great deal of our supply chains under their control. That has to stop, and those jobs can come here to New Mexico. So the group that can help most with that would be Congress. They could step in right now, but that is not happening. We've watched 2 months of fighting going on between the House and the Senate on both sides, and it's leaving everybody here at home out to dry. And you mentioned in the question, what are 2 things you wouldn't include? Well, the House has included letting violent criminals out of prison as part of a COVID relief bill. That doesn't belong there. Not only that, they also included tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires in California and in New York. I have no idea what that is doing in a COVID relief bill. And Congressman Lujan is right in the middle of this. He can go to Nancy Pelosi and say, take this stuff out. Let's get something done. Let's work across the aisle. But when politics comes first, everybody else here stands and watches, even in a pandemic, and it doesn't have to be this way.
Mr. Ronchetti, thank you. And I do want to give a rebuttal opportunity to Representative Lujan on that. You have 45 seconds, Representative.
Look, Mark Ronchetti just can't seem to tell the truth. Nowhere in the HEROES Act, which he points to in his attack ads on television and that he just included, was there ever a vote or language to release violent criminals. He's even accusing that the language included the release of other folks. He's absolutely wrong, and he continues to mislead voters across New Mexico. And it's important that every one of you be fact-checking him all night. Lastly, look, Mitch McConnell has been absent when it comes to these negotiations. He's not been at the table. On the first 5 bills that we were able to pass that the president signed, Mark Meadows was not a part of those negotiations. He needs to leave the room. And I'm happy to tell you that I believe progress is being made, and I look forward to getting back before the election so that way we can get something across the finish line.
Lujan, thank you.
We're going to move on to our next question, and it comes from the editor-in-chief of the Santa Fe New Mexican, Phil Casaus. Phil.
Chris, the Department of Energy has plans to increase plutonium pit production to 30 by 2026. Do you believe that an increased plutonium pit production at Los Alamos creates safety issues for northern New Mexico and our state in general? Congressman Lujan, you're up first.
Look, our national labs in New Mexico help change the world. They create opportunities for people all across our state, people like my dad. My dad was a union iron worker. We had a roof over our head because of his work up at Los Alamos. I've been proud to move legislation that makes investments when it comes to workforce resources in our communities as well, partnering with the DOE as well as with community colleges like Northern New Mexico College. And the important mission work that's taking place at Los Alamos helps to fund those initiatives. As a matter of fact, a lot of the work that also takes place in the area of non-proliferation comes from that mission work that you're asking the question about as well, Phil. And so, look, I've been proud to support the budgets with investments with Los Alamos and Sandia National Laboratories, and I'm willing to make sure that I'm putting in the work to make sure we're driving investments here at home, not just with our labs, but also with our bases. New Mexico is home to 3 incredible laboratories, Sandia, Los Alamos, and the Air Force Research Labs. And we need to continue to drive science. Heck, I was even proud to be on a call with Senator Udall and Senator Heinrich, as well as Sochi and Deb Haaland with Secretary Barrett, to make sure that we're putting in a fight to be able to get the Space Force located right here in New Mexico. We know how to make investments in our state, and our people deliver to make a difference when it comes to national security. I often say when there's something bad happening somewhere in the world, someone from our labs is there figuring out what's happening. And when there's something good, rest assured, someone from our labs is there making sure it gets done.
Okay, we're going to go over to Mark Ronchetti for this answer now.
Yeah, Phil, I think you make a fair point. And I think our labs are a critical part of our investment in our communities here. And there's no doubt they're a critical part of our nuclear mission, and that will continue. And I think we do that as well as anybody in the world here. And of course, that needs to be supported. And not only do we need to support that, we need to make sure that the channels that bring innovation out of the labs and into our communities need to be bolstered here. We have 2 of the very best labs in the world here in the state of New Mexico. And we have some avenues to help people out in that process to get jobs and to take that technology and move it to the private sector. But unfortunately, we don't have enough, and we need to continue to do that. And while I appreciate the congressman's support that he mentions here, it's support that has been spotty at best. If you go back to 2018 and House Resolution 1625, he voted to cut troop pay while voting to raise his own pay. I don't understand when we listen to these answers, we hear one New Mexico Ben Ray, and then we hear the DC Ben Ray with the actual record here. There was an NDAA, and that was basically a National Defense Authorization that he voted against. That took money away. You can't have it both ways. You can't say you support everybody around every corner, and then when you actually look at the real hard votes, they don't show the same thing.
We do need to give Mr. Bob Walsh an opportunity to answer this question, and then we will give Representative Ben Ray Lujan an opportunity to rebut. Well, let's start with Bob Walsh.
I have spent a career working on nuclear safety. I have had have been involved in subcontracts from both Los Alamos and Sandia Labs. The great fear of nuclear industry pollution is greatly exaggerated. On the other hand, we have no need for atomic weapons. The use of atomic weapons is unthinkable. We should never contemplate using them. We should unilaterally get rid of our nuclear weapons. As for the great strength of the laboratories, most of those people are, like I was, getting welfare for physicists. And most of those people, like me, would have preferred to have university positions, but weren't good enough to get them.
Okay, we saw that Representative Lujan was raising his hand for an opportunity for a rebuttal. We are going to give that to you, Mr. Ben Ray Lujan.
Thank you, Chris. Well, this is a time to fact check Mark Ronchetti number 2, 3, and 4. First off, I've never voted for a pay raise for myself. Second, I've consistently voted for pay raises for the military, including a 3% pay raise this year alone. And then, look, lastly, with our national labs, I've been proud to be a co-chair of our National Labs Caucus. Democrats and Republicans working together, we've been driving investments in New Mexico. Even when President Trump's budget tried to cut the cleanup budgets for our national labs. So, and sorry, the last thing, Chris, $6 billion in infrastructure and lab modernization was included in the infrastructure package we passed out of the House, which would benefit New Mexico, in addition to those workforce programs that I talked about earlier, driving workforce development right here at home. I'm proud to support our national labs, and shame on you, Mark.
And out of fairness, we are going to give Mark Ronchetti an opportunity, and that will be the last rebuttal, and then we'll move on to the question with Tessa.
Yes.
Congressman, you've been in Washington for 12 years. I have no doubt there are little bills you can point to, and there are votes you can point to that you can say you support this, that, or anything. I have no question that there isn't a single subject that you don't have in your quiver on that. But the question is, do you support our troops, our labs consistently so they know they never have to worry about that support? And unfortunately, it's not the case. You're not always on board. And so when you look at these issues, all I'm saying is, Congressman, people deserve to know that their senator will never let down the labs and the bases we have here. It's something Senator Domenici established, and it's something I'll follow up with.
Okay, Mr. Ronchetti, thank you. And we're actually going to stay with you for a bit because this is a question specifically for you only, Mr. Ronchetti. In this campaign, you stated President Trump has handled the COVID-19 crisis very well. Do you still agree with that analysis? And if so, what evidence can you provide to support a successful handling?
No, Tessa, what I said at the time was that knowing what we knew, that we moved ahead as well as we could. Look, there are a lot of people in this process, and I give our leaders some grace on this, including Nancy Pelosi. We have a lot of people in Congress who looked at this, and we didn't know what we were looking at here. But we have made some real progress here. But if things gone wrong, absolutely. Have we done as well as we should have? Absolutely not. So here is where we are, and here are the things we did to make some progress. Number one, the Defense Production Act was helpful in getting ventilators to people who needed them, and that was critical here. The China travel ban, that was important too, and we're moving quickly toward a vaccine here. So all of those have gone well, there's no question. But now we sit here, and instead of looking back in hopes of pitting both political parties against each other, which will do absolutely nothing, we need to look ahead and say, where are we with the next COVID relief bill? We've been waiting months. And you see the House and the Senate fighting it out once again, and there's nothing being done. And what I hope the congressman would do is step up here, and you can fact check it all you want. If you want to fact check Heroes Bill 6800 or Heroes 2 925 for exactly what was in there on the early release of violent criminals or the tax breaks for those who absolutely don't deserve them. They're in there, and that's what happens when politics takes over. This is too important now to start going back and forth, pointing at each other. How about Congress sits down and solves something for the American people? And Congressman, I know you can lead that.
Mr. Ronchetti, thank you. And Phil Casals with the Santa Fe New Mexican has the next question for everyone tonight. Phil.
Thanks, Tessa. This question is for Mr. Walsh. Mr. Walsh, the New Mexican quoted you in a candidate questionnaire saying that COVID-19 is a long-term problem, but not an emergency. With more than 200,000 deaths across the country, how do you define an emergency?
An emergency is defined in the dictionary, if you care to look in your dictionary, as something requiring immediate action. The COVID-19 is probably going to be with us for 2 to 5 years. There's really little hope that we will have a really effective vaccine or an effective treatment. We've been working on vaccines and treatments for the flu and for the common cold viruses for years and have only modest success. So we need to adapt to our new environment. We need, instead of having a tyranny from the government, which is, a tyranny, by the way, is defined as power without restraint, we need to have the legislature in session. In fact, we need to change our Emergency Powers Act, so after a certain short amount of time, the legislature must come in session, and then we must have rules for how the legislature can proceed when there is some kind of emergency that prevents normal procedures. Thank you, Phil.
Okay, this is a question only for Ben Ray Lujan. Mr. Lujan, you have publicly supported a Medicare for All plan. If enacted into law, some estimates bring the cost of Medicare for All at $30 trillion over a decade. How do you propose Americans pay for that? And would you be willing to cut from other programs?
Chris, this is an important question about healthcare. And I'm open to plans that will drive down the cost and reduce premiums and increase access to quality care for people across America. If there's anything we've learned during COVID, it's that when people get sick or they think they're sick, they should be able to get a test. Second, if they're sick, they should be able to see a doctor. Now, there are many estimates that also show the savings that this plan would generate. And by the way, for people, it would mean no deductibles and no premiums. And look, let's just face this. The United States right now is investing more in healthcare than any other industrialized nation, but people aren't getting the support that they need. And that's why I'm open to ideas that will drive down the cost of care. It's why I've been such a proud supporter of the Affordable Care Act in ensuring that we're able to protect people with pre-existing conditions. It's why I'm against the efforts by President Donald Trump to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Again, just to be clear, if the Supreme Court makes a decision to repeal that Affordable Care Act, Chris, protections for people with pre-existing go away. And last thing is, the same concerns and the same points were tried to be made about the Affordable Care Act when we were voting on that package. And look, what the Congressional Budget Office said is that it would save taxpayer dollars, and if only it would have included the public option that was taken out in the Senate, it would have saved taxpayer dollars even more. It's important that there's a conversation with how we can get to universal coverage in America versus efforts like President Trump and other Republicans that say they just simply want to repeal the Affordable Care Act.
Okay, Representative Lujan, thank you. And we did see that Mr. Walsh had signaled for a rebuttal. Since those questions are specifically for one candidate, we are not doing rebuttals to those questions. And actually, we are at the halfway point of tonight's debate. So we're going to take a short break. We have many more questions on the other side, and each candidate will actually have an opportunity to ask their own question.
And welcome back to the KOB 4 Santa Fe New Mexican U.S. Senate debate. Tessa Mentes and I are moderating along with Editor-in-Chief of the Santa Fe New Mexican, Phil Casaus.
The candidates are appearing tonight from 3 locations. Republican Mark Ronchetti is with us in our KOB 4 studio. Democrat Ben Ray Lujan is in his campaign office in Albuquerque, and Bob Walsh is at his home in Santa Fe tonight. And there are timekeepers at all locations.
We move to the portion of the debate now where candidates are permitted to ask another candidate a question. A reminder, same time limits apply. And Ben Ray Lujan, you may go first with the question that you have prepared.
Thank you, Chris. Mark, during a debate in May, you were asked a question about Medicare and Medicaid, and you said that Medicare should be, I quote, a private insurance plan. If you turned Medicare into a private insurance plan, it would end Medicare as we know it. It would devastate coverage for seniors across New Mexico. How can you look seniors in the eye and agree with the Heritage Foundation and say that you want to turn Medicare into a private insurance plan?
I absolutely.
Hence privatizing it.
Yeah, no, Benry, I appreciate the question. I absolutely didn't say that, and in fact, I don't believe it at all. Let me be very clear on where I am. Okay. Well, let me be very clear on where I am, because this isn't a funny subject, Congressman. To be honest with you, most people looking at us tonight wonder what's going to happen with their. Congressman, can I finish? Please, can I get my time back? I'll tell you what, we'll keep going here. Now, here's what I'll say about it, though. There are plenty of people here wondering what exactly our solutions to this are. If you are on Medicare or Medicaid, those benefits should be protected, period, end of discussion. And we should also protect pre-existing conditions. Look, I'm on the Affordable Care Act. My daughter Ava has a pre-existing condition that's not covered by the Affordable Care Act. Okay? And we were told when the Affordable Care Act started that each family could save as much as $2,500 because of this new government program. Well, when has a government program ever saved people money in this particular case? So, Congressman, what you advocate for, unfortunately, is a takeover of the healthcare system. It will raise everybody's taxes by 2 to 3 times. Not only that, it will put the government in charge of your doctor, and anybody who has a private healthcare plan will absolutely lose it. So my solution is this. Let's sit down and have Congress come up with a bipartisan plan, because if both sides buy into it, then it won't get demagogued, which is what's happening in Washington right now. We can drive down prescription drug costs. We can get people better access to the care they need for cheaper. But it's not going to be because the government swallows it up. It's going to be because the people have choice.
Mr. Ronchetti, thank you. Okay, Mr. Walsh, now is your time to ask your question of another candidate tonight.
Well, I'm going to put Mark on the spot again. Mark, you have said that you favor federal forces coming in to help Albuquerque with law enforcement. Why do you think that New Mexicans are not able to manage law enforcement themselves?
Yeah. You know, Mr. Walsh, that's a very good question. The problem is, for too long, our leaders in this state haven't taken crime seriously. And if you go in Albuquerque or across this state, that becomes very, very obvious. We have a catch and release policy in the Albuquerque area where we see people go in 1 minute and come back out the other minute. The fact of the matter is, until we have laws in this state that protect every family, we have to do something else. So what do? One of the solutions on that is turn to federal help. And that's what I want to do. And we saw it with Operation Legend. 25 federal officers coming in and 40 officers paid for by the feds for the Albuquerque Police Department. We do that because we have to, because the job isn't being done within the state. And I promise you this much. If the job isn't done here, I'll do everything I can to get federal help. That's why the Albuquerque Police Officers Association has endorsed me, and the Bernalillo County Officers Association has endorsed me as well. For too long, we haven't done this. And when that federal help started to come in, the response from our federal delegation, one of them said, we don't need stormtroopers. And unfortunately, Congressman Lujan said he doesn't want another Portland. Well, guess what? This isn't Portland. Someone's got to tackle violent crime. Our families are crying out for it. And in this case, it needs to be the federal government, because you get longer sentences when the feds step in. And that's exactly what we need in this particular case.
Okay, a couple of things. It looks like Mr. Walsh needs to fix his microphone. We do want to give him an opportunity to get that in place. We're not sure why it was taken off to begin with. But we do want to say, Mark Ronchetti, you now have the opportunity to ask your question to another candidate. Mr. Walsh, we do need you to get your microphone situated.
Congressman Lujan, I'd like to ask you about one thing that's on your website, and it's a no cash bond statement that you make. You support no cash bond. Well, in the Albuquerque area, no cash bond has been devastating, and across other parts of the state has been devastating as well. And there's nothing that illustrates that better than the case of Jackson Weller. He is a UNM baseball player, or was a UNM baseball player, that was out on a date with a girl, and someone by the name of Darian Bashir, who was out on pretrial detention, went up to him, shot him in the chest, and killed him. That was one of those moments that so many people across this state looked at and shook their heads. I wonder, how can you possibly support a no cash bond system when in this city right now we are one of the most violent cities in the country because we turn too many people back out on the street that are dangerous?
Look, Mark, we all know that crime is a problem, and losing anyone like that is absolutely horrific. any instance of crime, we need to make sure that we're able to support our local law enforcement officials and make sure that we're able to drive those federal dollars so that there's real partnerships with federal agencies and with the city of Albuquerque, with the police department, or with Bernalillo County or any other PD across the state. And that's why I've been proud to vote over and over, including just this year, for over $525 million in burn justice grants and COPS funding to our local police departments, including hundreds of millions of dollars that have come into New Mexico alone to make sure that we're able to provide that support. And look, you laid out a few attacks with some of your previous answers, so I'm going to take a chance to respond to them. First off, when I had a chance to visit personally with our U.S. Attorney, Mr. Anderson, I made it clear to him that what was happening in Portland was not welcomed here or anywhere in the country. As soon as he told me that that would not happen, I asked him yet again that day, how can that $9.7 million that the Trump administration had been holding up be released immediately? The same $9.7 million that I voted for to be released for the city of Albuquerque to provide more support for law enforcement to fight crime on our streets here at home, Mark, and it's still not been released as far as I know. So I'm going to continue to fight hard every day that I can, understanding that we can drive those investments here at home and that we can do everything that we can to address crime in our state and in all of our cities.
Congressman Lujan, thank you. We will give Mark Ronchetti an opportunity to respond to the congressman there on that.
Congressman, you talked about the 9.6 million.
You didn't give me a chance to respond to his attacks earlier?
We are keeping this fair. Mr. Lujan, you have had 2 rebuttals at this point. This is the second one for Mr. Ronchetti. It is up to you guys as to how much information and how many questions get answered throughout this debate. So we are keeping it fair on our point. We have a tally right here. Mr. Ronchetti, go ahead.
I'll just make this very quick so we can get some more time. The reason that $9.6 million has not been turned loose is because we are a sanctuary city, and that is the problem. And that is the real issue here. And in fact, Congressman Lujan supports that as well. So we need to do what's best for the people of this state and their safety. For far too long, we've had these approaches, and unfortunately, Congressman, right in your answer there, you gave it. You made the Portland thing. That's the first thing you said. Instead of saying, I'm going to stand up for the people of my city and state, your first response was Portland. Your first response should be, let me look out for the people of New Mexico.
Mr. Ronchetti, thank you. Okay, this next question this evening is coming from Phil Casals with Santa Fe New Mexican. Phil.
For years, politicians in New Mexico have said our state needs to diversify its economy away from over-reliance on the oil and gas industry. To date, that hasn't happened. What would you do to ensure the state has a more well-rounded economy, and what could the federal government do to help in that endeavor? We'll start this round with Mark Ronchetti.
Well, Phil, I think a variety of things. First of all, we need to make doing business easier in the state of New Mexico. We make it really hard. And when you talk to business owners across this state, which I've done over the past year here, what they'll tell you is it's just too difficult here. So we need to do a few things. First of all, we've added economic opportunity zones across New Mexico. There are 63 of them, and we need to add more. And we also need to bring down the level of investment there, meaning a lot of times you just have to invest too much money to qualify for them. We need to target that money to small business owners so they can get things going and they can provide jobs across this state. But there is no question either that oil and gas is a big part of what we do in New Mexico. And I make no secret of that. It's critical here. And one thing we need to make sure we do is we don't adopt policies which will make doing business in New Mexico even worse. And that's the Green New Deal. And it's what my opponent sponsored. It's a $93 trillion bill that promises to wipe out oil and gas in 10 years. That will mean catastrophe for our state budget. That's how we fund our education. We can't do that. And on top of that, the bill also calls for paychecks for people who choose not to work, paid for by you. I'll never support that. We just can't make things more difficult and more business difficult to do here in New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Ronchetti. Congressman Lujan, you're up next.
So, Phil, thank you for this important question, because I get excited when we talk about New Mexico's future and job opportunities that we can continue to expand and attract. First off, manufacturing. especially now as we need to hold China accountable, bring manufacturing back to the United States. The United States, Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA, we're going to see more and more growth in and around Santa Teresa, and I think we can see that growth into every corner of our state by bringing more manufacturing and trade opportunities. That USMCA also means more opportunity for our agricultural producers, like our dairy farmers and dairy producers right here in New Mexico. I believe we can be doing more in our beautiful state through the Farm Bill to be able to support acequias and land grants and smaller farmers so that we get more business opportunities in ag as well. And then look, our national labs and our military bases. By continuing to drive investments into the labs and to the bases, I believe that we can spur more startups through tech transfer. I've been one of the leaders, not just on a bipartisan tech transfer caucus, but moving policy so that way we can get that technology right into the hands of entrepreneurs and commercialize it here at home. And then open up public-private partnerships with our national labs. I've moved legislation already, it's pending in the US Senate, that would create a foundation to attract private capital so that we could use that to help spur more innovation and startups here at home. I'm excited about New Mexico's future, and all of that's going to only benefit if we can pass an infrastructure package to make sure that we're able to close the digital divide in our state.
All right, Representative Lujan, thank you very much. Mr. Walsh, your turn to respond.
I actually tried to start a small business in New Mexico. New Mexico is a very bad environment for a startup. With my son, we started an ambulance service providing advanced cardiac life support. Our business model originally was 2 part-time people on call to take runs. At the end, we had 20 employees. We were running 4 units. And the state changed the Medicaid rules such that we couldn't get paid at all. We would get a call from Taos to come and take somebody who needed heart surgery, and our ambulance would head right up there. But then we'd have to call the Medicaid provider, an insurance company, and get authorization to do that transport. And they would say, oh, well, we have another company we use for those sorts of things. So eventually, we had to give it up and let it be taken over that somebody who was willing to compromise more with the care. My son moved to the state of Washington and started an ambulance company there. And then there's Bill Gates, who Microsoft started out in New Mexico. Imagine if we had Microsoft in New Mexico now.
Mr. Walsh, I apologize. Your time
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next question. The COVID-19 crisis has exposed gaps in Native American country in healthcare, infrastructure, and broadband internet access. And to this day, many still don't have running water or electricity. Who do you hold accountable for this, and what would you do to bring actual change? We start with Bob Walsh.
Well, once again, this is not a federal problem. This is a local problem. I've already offered to contribute some money to help get clean water out to a section of the Navajo Reservation. These things need to be taken care of by voluntary organizations, by people volunteering their time and their wealth. There is some commitment to provide health care, but our Native communities need to become more self-reliant. And what's happening is that the most self-reliant are leaving the reservations and actually creating a problem. So our Native communities really need to think about how to encourage small business startups there and how to provide the necessary infrastructure, such as internet access and good roads. Thank you.
Okay, Ray Lujan, we're going to go to you now for the same question.
Look, COVID-19 has hurt so many of our communities. especially our Native American brothers and sisters and our brothers and sisters on the Navajo Nation. Look, we have to make sure that we're able to get water delivery into every one of those communities. And that's why I was very proud that one of the first pieces of legislation that I authored in the House that was signed into law was an infrastructure package that provided now $1.3 billion to build the Navajo Gallup water pipeline to provide water to 43 chapters. It's still being built, but there's more infrastructure that's going to be needed to complement that, to take those arterials to get water into every community. I've also been leading initiatives with investments when it comes to closing that broadband gap. The sad thing is it gets caught up with some of that partisan infighting. Right now, there's a pending package that I helped put together. It includes $80 billion to close that broadband digital divide in rural communities and in Native American communities. And then, Chris, just as we know, when we were fortunate to pass the CARES Act funding to provide immediate relief to our brothers and sisters on the Navajo Nation, the Trump administration held it back for almost 80 days. And then there were dates that were put in that I've been trying to get fixed so that the Navajo Nation can use those dollars for more infrastructure, and our Republican colleagues refuse to allow those to get done. So again, the federal government needs to live up to its trust responsibilities, and we need more members across the country that are going to be strong supporters of our Native American brothers and sisters like we have with the New Mexico delegation.
Mr. Ronchetti, it's now your opportunity to answer this question.
You know, I think you ask a very valuable question there, and there's no question we have to continue to invest in an infrastructure package. I think is going to be key in all of that. There's no doubt. And with that infrastructure package, not only are we going to help with that broadband gap, but I think we could also help with obviously a lot of the separate infrastructure issues. And that broadband gap may not be fiber out to every house. It may be developing technologies that we're seeing now developed right here in New Mexico that can help every home in the Navajo Nation have access to what they need for broadband. And there's no question that COVID led to really this being laid bare for so many people in these communities. But I think one of the key things to remember here is, Congressman, you've been there for 12 years. You've had the opportunity to help in this problem so many different ways here. And I don't doubt for a second that you don't have the motivation to want to do it. But what I doubt is the effectiveness of being able to reach across the aisle, and instead of pointing at Trump or instead of pointing at the Republicans and saying they wouldn't do it, that's not good enough. We have to be able to get people on both sides of the aisle. We've got to go over to Senator Sinema, and we've got to go over to Senator McSally and up to Senator Gardner and say, let's get this done. Let's do what we need to do for our Native communities, depending on where those Native communities span and depending on what states they're part of. But it's not good enough anymore to say the other guys aren't letting me do it. We deserve better than that. We can do better than that.
Ben Ray Lujan, Mark Ronchetti said you did not have the motivation to do that. Would you like to offer a rebuttal?
I said he did have the motivation.
He did not. Thank you.
Yeah. Look, just real quick here. I'm a proud member of a bipartisan caucus, the Native American Caucus. We work as Democrats and Republicans every day to protect sacred sites, to improve access to health care within the Indian Health Service, to fight for investments for the Bureau of Indian Education. And again, Mark, that Navajo Gallup water pipeline, that might seem like a little thing to you. You talked about those little bills that I've been proud to pass before. It's $1.3 billion in delivering water to 43 chapters, and it's just the beginning. I'm very proud that I was raised between the pueblos of Nambe and Poake. This is something that I believe in, and I'll continue to fight with every bone in my body for the good of the people in New Mexico, including our Native American constituents.
Representative, thank you. Now for our next question. Through the years, Congress has passed legislation to ensure equal civil rights, but millions of Americans believe what we have is not enough and not enforced. Do you believe more work needs to be done to improve equality for all Americans? And if so, what would that legislation entail? And should it include stiffer consequences for law enforcement convicted of violating somebody's civil rights? We begin tonight with Mr. Walsh.
Well, as we've been hearing in the last few minutes, the solution that the establishment parties offer for every problem is to spend money. A billion here, a billion there. As someone said, sometimes that adds up to real money. Many people have a distorted sense of what rights are provided to us. We have rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We do not have a right to someone else's labor. The introduction of the income tax amendment made it possible for the federal government to raise far more money than it needed to provide its basic function of securing our basic rights. So they take that extra money and they spend it by returning it to the people with restrictions that we would not otherwise have. So you can't have a right to health care because doctors and nurses aren't slaves. You can't have a right to education because teachers are not slaves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Okay, Mr. Ronchetti, your turn.
Tessa, I think there are definitely things we can do to improve on what's happening with policing, and of course to ensure that every child, no matter where they come from, no matter their nationality, no matter their background, gets an opportunity at success here. And I think first and foremost, when we talk about the racial issue of our time, this is something we've seen laid bare here very recently here. And there are things that can be done. When you talk to police officers, you realize most of them are very good people and they do their job well. No one wants bad cops off the street more than a good cop. And there have been solutions offered up in the Senate. Senator Tim Scott offered up a bill with no chokeholds. It had cameras. It had better reporting for problem officers, no knock warrants. That was close. It was 75% of what everybody was looking for in this issue. But once again, it got blown up because of a fight with the House. And unfortunately, Congressman, you could have helped in that. You guys could have come together and we could have police reform right now. But if Tim was to get credit, well, then that was a problem. And so it blew up here. So I think what we really have to do here is make sure that we provide opportunity to everybody in our communities here. And no one does that affect more than here in the Albuquerque area. Think about our low-income communities here. They have no school choice whatsoever. Too many parents in Albuquerque right now and across this state are forced to put their kids in failing schools. They deserve options like public charter options to go along with their public schools.
Mr. Ronchetti, thank you. And finally, Congressman Lujan, your chance to respond and answer the question.
Thank you, Tessa. You asked an important question about civil rights and human rights and equal rights and what would go into that. First off, to all that's happening across the country today, I think that it needs to be abundantly clear. Racism is a problem. Systemic racism is a problem. When the President of the United States, during a debate on national stage, gets asked by a Fox News anchor to denounce white supremacists and he won't do it, that's a problem. And that's why, again, we have to come together. I appreciate my opponent's kind words about Senator Scott. He's a good person, and he's working and he's trying. And there still are bipartisan conversations taking place with Senator Scott and the Congressional Black Caucus. And I believe that there will be the ability to come together to find a bipartisan package to pass on police reform that includes no chokeholds and a ban on those, and also with body cams. But I'm going to go further as well as you talk about the importance of civil rights and human rights and equal rights. Our Republican colleagues also continue to stand in the way of passing paycheck fairness to end pay discrimination against women. We passed an important piece of legislation demanding equal rights for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. And again, the Republicans in the Senate refused to pass it. That's not about pointing fingers. It's just the realities of where those differences are. And I'm certainly hopeful that when we put a package together, we're able to address each and every one of these important issues for the good of America. We need to bring that moral compass again and be leaders like we were before President Trump.
Congressman, thank you. Okay, the question and answer portion of this debate has come to an end, so we are actually going to start with our closing remarks. First up is Mr. Bob Walsh. Mr. Walsh.
Well, we had talked about several things that we need to clarify a little further. As for the problems with the state economy, those problems are with the state, not with the federal government. And we have had many years of Democratic control of the state legislature. If you want change, if you want better opportunity for startup businesses, look down your ballot and find those Libertarian candidates and vote for them. We are in danger of losing it here. The people have the right, the duty, to replace the government or to alter it if it's not meeting their needs. And we have governments obstructing peaceful protests. We have presidents keeping prisoners offshore so they can have torture. We have the government separating families that simply come to the border and ask for asylum. We have the government separating Indian families, historically, taking away the children and not letting them speak their native language. It is your right, it is our duty to alter or abolish such government.
Mr. Walsh, you've exceeded your time limit. I
The
have to interrupt. I'm
Libertarian
sorry.
Party offers the opportunity to alter it.
All right, Mr. Walsh, thank you.
So do your duty, vote Libertarian.
Mr. Walsh, thank you. Mark Ronchetti, we're going to go to you now because you can now begin your closing remarks.
Chris, Tessa, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank Congressman and Bob Walsh as well for being here. Look, I came to New Mexico in 1998, and I didn't know a soul, and I didn't own a thing. But when I came here and you welcomed me into your homes, for the first time in my adult life, what I actually did for a job seemed to make a difference. And so when I did it, I went after it with the maximum amount of energy and focus that I possibly could, because I felt like that was the very least that you should expect from me. But as I've lived here and I've seen what we've dealt with over decades, we deserve better in this state. You deserve better from your leaders. And you can get better by wishing for it, or you can get better by stepping up and trying to make that change. Admittedly, this was a huge change for my family and I, but it is worth it for all of us. It's worth it for you to be a servant for you. Because the more we go through what we're seeing in Washington now, the more frustrating that it is. Unfortunately, my opponent appears to be one person in New Mexico and somebody else in DC. In New Mexico, Ben Ray knows that we need all our energy. We need it all. In DC, he supports the Green New Deal that gets rid of oil and gas in 10 years. In New Mexico, he supports the ACA and boosting that. When he gets to DC, it's Medicare for all and no choice for you. And finally, in New Mexico, he knows we need to address crime. In DC, he lets violent criminals out of jail and he's for catch and release. It's time to stop with the 2 Washingtons and 2 New Mexicos. It's time to bring New Mexico to Washington. I'd appreciate your vote.
Mr. Ronchetti, thank you. And finally, Congressman Ben Ray Lujan, you can make your closing remarks.
Thank you, Tessa. And to you and to all the moderators tonight, thank you for coming together to have this important conversation with voters throughout New Mexico. And I also want to thank my other opponents, the other candidates, for joining us tonight. Look, I'm proud to be born and raised in New Mexico. I went to Head Start down the street from where I grew up, just down the road from the church. I went to high school here in New Mexico, from kindergarten all the way through graduating in 12th grade from Poake High. Proud graduate of New Mexico Highlands University. Look, there's a lot of important lessons you learn growing up on a small farm, and you learn how to put in the work and get the job done. It's not about a celebrity. Look, Mark Ronchetti, he spent his life behind a camera. He's good at it, and I applaud him for it. What I've learned to do from leaders like Pete Domenici and Senator Bingaman, Manuel Lujan, Tom Udall, and Dennis Chavez is you put your head down, you roll up your sleeves, and you get the job done. That's who I am. I've never sought out the limelight. Senator Domenici and Manuel Lujan were honored to be in those leadership roles because they could make a difference for the people in New Mexico. That's who I've learned from. And I also learned from my dad. He taught me you treat others with respect and dignity. We know the work that has to be done. I know this state, it's who I am, it's in my blood. I hope I can earn your vote and your support to be your voice in the United States Senate. I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much. May God bless each and every one of you, and you have a safe night, and remember to wear your mask. Stay safe.
Congressman, thank you. That will do it for our debate. We thank all of the candidates and Phil Casals from the Santa Fe New Mexican for participating.
We will have analysis and reaction to everything we have seen here tonight coming up on the Night Beat at 10. So for now, we are joining Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden's town hall, hosted by NBC's Lester Holt.